Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be a little bit of an odd video, I feel, because I'm going to put in some footage that I actually shot about 2 months ago now, I would say, because basically what happened is I decided that the Sony A9 wasn't the camera for me. It wasn't really doing what I expected it to do, so rather than persevere with it any longer, I decided to sell it. And then immediately after selling it, I did film this first part coming up, which runs through my thought process in terms of thinking what camera to try next, because I had thought that I found the camera that was going to meet most of my photography needs. So now I was in a position where my first choice was now off the table. And if I was honest, I didn't really think that I would be back at this stage so soon. Like I said, I thought the Sony A9 was really going to deliver on what I wanted it to deliver. I know a lot of people will probably think that I'm hankering after a perfect camera that doesn't exist, but really I've only got really a few main aims that I want to meet in a camera, and that's predominantly being able to more easily photograph my small furry dog running towards me and around on objects, etc. And yes, I would like to try a full frame camera after being with Micro Four Thirds for a while, because I do, even though I recognise the challenges of getting sufficient depth of field in your images, I do find it's easier to separate your subject from a scene using a full frame sensor over that as a crop sensor camera. And thirdly, I do put a lot of emphasis in cameras that feel good to use and are intuitive to use, and which make me want to pick up and use them. The Sony really struggled in that aspect. I really didn't like the whole Sony experience in terms of using the Sony A9. I actually thought the Sony A7S that I used previously was a better feeling camera. I just loved that camera. I hated the colors, but I did really like using the Sony A7S to adapt vintage lenses to. Yeah, and on the back of my aims, like I've tried a lot of cameras and I've had some success, but generally my results have been mixed, hence why I wanted to go for a camera like the Sony A9, or so I thought, that would make the tracking and the capturing of the subject a little bit better. But that wasn't to be with a Sony, so the following clip will basically go through my thought process right after selling my A9 of what camera I thought I would try next. And what I'll do is I'll run that clip now, and then I'll come back and talk about where I am now 2 months on. Did I end up buying the camera that I initially thought I would, or did I decide to go off piste and try something else? But anyway, so here's the first clip. I did briefly think about going back to Micro Four Thirds and certainly looking at maybe picking up the Olympus OM1, especially now that the company have said that they're going to be releasing some further updates to the camera in a few months' time. But part of me doesn't want to go quite back there yet, Four Thirds, because I have enjoyed the full frame look and the quality of the images that Sony has delivered when they've been in focus. That kind of led me on to thinking as well recently whether I should give Fujifilm another go and maybe pick up like an old X-T3, or maybe even jump to the X-T5. But again, something holds me back from Fujifilm, even though I do love their ethos. I love the physical controls of using the camera, although it can hinder you from quickly selecting, again, different shooting modes, going from like static to action. There is a delay in changing the camera over to shoot those particular scenes. But it just comes down to the fact that I don't particularly like the X-Trans sensor. You know, I've said it before, certainly in Lightroom, which I do like using for my cataloguing my images and editing my images, I just don't find the images to render that well. And yes, I know you can use the enhance function to improve that, but that's just added steps in my workflow. And yeah, I'm not a massive fan of the X-Trans sensor, and that hasn't changed. So I think Fujifilm is still out of the running. And even though I still hanker over a medium format film camera like the older Fujifilm 50S, I think it is, which was released back in 2016, I think I'm ultimately the weight, the size of the camera and the lenses would just grind me down. And again, that would be great for my like landscape type photography, but it would be useless for trying to capture pictures of my dog running towards me. So I think at the moment, medium format digital cameras are off the table as well. Nothing's really changed for me in Canon land. The lens selection is pretty tied down to just Canon only, so that kind of makes all of their options extremely expensive, and I don't really feel that they've capitalized fully yet on the benefits of mirrorless camera systems in terms of the size and weight of the RF lenses. And I guess again, you can obviously use the converter to use your existing EF lenses, but I just don't have that many good EF lenses, and they're not exactly small and light either. So I think for me, Canon is a non-starter. I still have question marks with Nikon. I think their lens selection is better than Canon these days, and they certainly seem to have opened up their mount a little bit more now that the Tamron is making lenses under their own name as well as under Nikon's name. So there's definitely a lot more lens options for the Nikon system, but I'm not convinced, again, like Canon, that they really capitalized on the mirrorless nature of their cameras and made lenses to match. They still seem to be, to me, a little bit big and heavy for the system. This doesn't really leave me with a lot of other options, to be honest. And I did think about this particular brand before going for the Sony A9, but I ruled it out at the time because it had inferior autofocus. But now I'm starting to think whether the Panasonic Lumix S5 II might indeed be a camera which is good enough, especially since when I last looked, they've released the firmware 3, which is supposed to have improved the autofocus system photography quite dramatically with the introduction of animal eye autofocus. And I'm thinking now that it can't really be any worse than the Sony A9 that I've been using. And if it is, then I'll just revert back to what I used to do before in terms of putting the focus box on the dog and capture her that way, or even set up some kind of trap, you know, to ensure that I achieve focus at the critical moments. So yeah, so that's where I currently am at the moment. I feel like maybe the L-mount system is the way to go, certainly because Panasonic do seem to be making lenses which are a lot smaller and compact for their full frame system. Certainly the 20 to 60 kit lens looks very intriguing. And I think I did a size comparison with their 70 to 300 millimeter lens, which is equivalent in size and weight to the Olympus 40 to 150 f2.8 equivalent in terms of focal length range. So I'm thinking that Lumix might be good enough for me moving forward. They also have some interesting smaller lens options. I know I dissed Sigma before for being too heavy on the Sony system, but certainly some of the smaller primes seem to be a good option for the air mount system, and they seem to be cheaper as well for the air mount system as opposed to what they are for the E-mount system. Likewise, I feel that the lens prices for the Panasonic L-mount lens is certainly definitely a lot more affordable to me than the Sony E-mount lenses were. And I like the fact that the Panasonic camera does have a lot of the smarts that I liked from the Micro Four Thirds in terms of pre-capture, handheld high resolution, live composite, and yeah, those functions were great with my Micro Four Thirds systems. And yeah, I just feel that it does seem to pack in a lot of features into their cameras. And unlike other manufacturers, they do seem to be quite lively in terms of adding extra features through firmware updates. So that was then. Fast forward, like I said, we're about 2 months on now for when I filmed that first bit. Time has settled. I had a chance to, like I said, revisit the drawing board and determine what I wanted in the camera, you know, in terms of capturing my fast furry dog, which is probably too small for a lot of sensors, and probably why the Sony A9 struggled. It was just too small to track. So what camera did I end up with this time? So you could argue, like, back to my main aims, you know, furry dog, running fast, full frame look in terms of depth of field, and good handling, good experience. Arguably, the second and the third aims really could be met by a number of different cameras, but where my pool of cameras to choose from, it gets really pared back, is when I'm trying to get a camera to meet that primary aim, you know, tracking and capturing my small furry animal. And I'm probably sure here that the Olympus OM1 will probably do a good job, because like I said, I did have really good success with my previous cameras, which did include my Olympus EM1 Mark II, but I didn't really feel like that I wanted to go back to Micro Four Thirds at the moment. I certainly see the advantages of full frame in terms of higher ISO performance, certainly in low light situations. So I wasn't yet ready to give up my attempt at getting a full frame camera solution for my photography moving forward. So in that clip, you saw me probably err towards a Lumix S5. Well, even though I think that would tick the second and third aim, you know, in terms of being a nice camera to use and giving me that full frame look, and it also has some Micro Four Thirds smarts, being that it's a Panasonic camera. But fundamentally, even with its recent strides in terms of putting in PDAF into its cameras, as well as updating the firmware several times to introduce like animal eye autofocus detection, there's just something in the back of my mind thinking that Lumix was not going to be as good as other cameras. And as I've just come from the Sony A9, I really don't feel like I've got that confidence in Panasonic at the moment to be able to deliver my primary aim. So with Lumix off the cards, Sony off the cards, or the Sony A9 off the cards, and Nikon really, because I've already really discounted Nikon cameras in the past for various reasons, it doesn't really leave a lot of options. So obviously one of those options is another Sony camera. Some of the newer Sony cameras have more advanced autofocus algorithms. They might be better at tracking smaller animals like my dog and then keeping them tracked in terms of improving that hit rate autofocus performance. But as I've already said before, I wasn't a massive fan of the Sony experience, and the newer Sony cameras are crazy expensive, so they're well above my budget at the moment, like £1,300, which is what I spent on the original Sony A9, along with a £200 85mm f1.8 lens for that camera was probably pushing my budget. Like the most I spent on a camera before then was about £500-600. So £1,300 was a lot for me. And I think the newer Sony cameras are certainly running into the thousands. So the remaining choice was definitely, and always has been, an outright no. I didn't really give it, let's put a name to that, Canon. I didn't really see Canon as a contender in any of my research until this point. Well, I say this point, I actually did end up buying a Canon camera about a month ago. I guess I have to thank the Sony system here with the Sony A9, because one thing I did do with that camera was buy the Sigma MC11 adapter to mount my Canon EF glass to the Sony A9, and it worked pretty poorly on the A7S that I tried, in that it took several seconds to acquire focus, but then when it did acquire focus, it did do a good job. But to be honest, on the Sony cameras, the experience was pretty seamless. I wouldn't know that I was using a non-native lens. The only thing it didn't work well in was video. It only worked, and the continual autofocus worked in photos, but not for video. So from that, I knew when I looked at Canon that EF lenses adapted to the new RF mount would probably work pretty well, and user reviews, user experience on forums, etc. do seem to chime with that view. And certainly from my experiences since I bought my Canon camera, that is certainly the case. And as such, I've expanded my EF lens collection, knowing that if ultimately I don't get on with the Canon or a modern Canon camera, then I can still use those lenses on my Canon 5D, which I will do another video on, I promise, because my first experience with the Canon 5D lasted 8 days. This second Canon 5D I've now had for over a year, and I just love using it. So yeah, that is coming. I just need to probably collect a little bit more information on what I want to convey in that future video. So back to Canon, and knowing that the fact that I could adapt EF lenses would counteract some of the negatives around the Canon ecosystem, namely the fact that its RF mount is pretty closed up. There's not really a lot of options other than Canon's own lenses that you can actually mount to the camera. And obviously the lenses themselves are very, very expensive. They seem to be very, very budget lenses, or they're L glass and very, very expensive with nothing really in between. It seems like a no-brainer to me to open that up to like Sigma and Tamron and allow them to fill that middle ground. And I really do hope that Canon do allow that soon for their full frame system. Yeah, so the other thing that put me off with Canon before was the fact that the bodies were so expensive. Like when I originally looked, like the R6 II was new, so that was very, very expensive. And the R6, whilst a bit cheaper, didn't seem to meet... I wasn't confident the autofocus was going to be good enough for my use case. And the fact that really I needed the R6 II to be in with a chance of being happy with its autofocus performance when tracking my small furry dog. So, but then when I started obviously re-looking at Canon, I did discover that the R8 existed, and I'd originally discounted the RP and the R Canon cameras a while ago when I was looking at full frame cameras to try, purely because the RP was a little bit crippled in terms of features. There didn't seem to be a lot going for it really, but when I looked at the R8 again, the main thing that made me look towards the R8 was the fact that it had the performance of the R6 II in terms of the sensor and the autofocus ability. So that was a massive big plus tick in terms of considering the R8. So even though ideally I'd like a camera with IBIS and I'd like a camera with a really good EVF. I do understand why Canon had to differentiate between the R8 and the R6 II, partly because the R8 is a lot lighter than the R6 II and also a lot cheaper as well. So those factors really push me towards trying the Canon R8, which is exactly what I've done. And I'm not really going to explore much more than that in this video. I've obviously only had the camera for about a month or so, so I feel like I need some more time to get to grips with the camera in order to offer up some of my initial thoughts and to determine whether the advantages, i.e. the fact that it's got the R6 II sensor and autofocus abilities, whether they outweigh some of perhaps the negatives of the R8 in terms of its smaller EVF, smaller body size, which might have an impact on handling of the camera and just general feel and usability. I also, as well, in that video, obviously compare it with my other systems and my experiences with the Sony A9, just to see whether I feel that I might have settled on a camera and ultimately whether it does perform against that primary objective of mine. I'm still getting to grips. I think it's probably just a problem coming on off the back of using crop sensor cameras in terms of getting the depth of field right in an image. Like with Micro Four Thirds, even shooting it like f2.8, you could be pretty assured that you would get quite a lot of the scene in focus, whereas I feel like with full frame you've got to go to f8, f9 and above to get a reasonable amount of the scene in focus. I can certainly see why people used to worry about focus stacking their images in order to get that sharpness from front to back in an image, whereas obviously with Micro Four Thirds I never really bothered with stacking any images. So anyway, so here is the Canon R8, and literally I've just picked up this lens this morning, which is a Tamron 17-35 f2.8 to f4, and that one appealed to me because of its weight and size, and also that wide aperture of f2.8 at the wide end. If I ever do feel like I want to dabble in astrophotography, I do feel having a wide aperture at a wide angle would be beneficial. So anyway, so that's the current setup. That's it there with just the control ring adapter. So this is takes the EF lenses and makes them compatible with the RF adapter, and then obviously that's just the Canon R8 on its own. And I'll quickly cover it back up because it's got no protection for its sensor, although it does clean the sensor when you shut it off each time and change the lens, but I don't know how effective that is at keeping the sensor clean. Another thing that I didn't think I'd have to worry about in terms of keeping the sensor clean, because I don't think I've ever had to clean my Micro Four Thirds or my APS-C sensors, but it seems to be more of a problem the larger the sensor, which makes sense because it gathers more light. It's only right that it will probably gather more dust as well from the environment. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I'll just put out some images that I've been happy with, that I've taken with the Canon R8, but there's going to be certainly more to follow with the Canon R8. I think it is performing better than the A9. Like, it certainly does track my dog, and you can see the focus on the eye, so it certainly tracks it well. What I'm not convinced about yet is whether the hit rate is as good as its tracking ability, but obviously I just need a bit more time, pull my thoughts together, and then I'll come back and convey some initial thoughts about the Canon R8. Yeah, it's amazing to think that this camera, the Canon, the body weighs about 460 grams, which it just makes me think, what the hell are Micro Four Thirds consortium playing at? You know, they need to be playing to their strengths in releasing smaller, lighter cameras, rather than cameras that certainly for the OM1 is larger and heavier than this Canon R8. I know obviously the Micro Four Thirds brings benefits to other types of photography, certainly wildlife, in terms of doubling the focal length in the lenses that you use. But for all other types of photography, it's hard to understand why you would opt for a crop sensor camera at the moment. And certainly when the mirrorless full frame cameras are certainly getting smaller and more nimble to use. So yeah, so I've probably ranted on far too long again, as per usual. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the images coming up, and I'll see you next time. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.